other news, Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, has expressed sadness about the sudden passing of Inkosi Zwelakhe Ndaba of Ntabamhlophe Ndaba, was reportedly brutally killed by unknown gunmen at his home last night near Estcourt. The minister urged law enforcement agencies to leave no stone unturned and make sure that the perpetrators are brought to book. Sending condolences to the Ndaba family, Dlamini Zuma described him as a leader of the people who led with diligence, compassion, and exuded the greatest wisdom to his people. More details will follow. Now, in other news, we speak to Jenni Irish-Qhobosheane, who is a senior analyst at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, to talk about the spate of crime that we've seen in the country and the trends. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Ms. Irish. Obviously, the more immediate case, which I think a lot of people have said is indicative of just how crime-ridden and lawless this country has become, is that violent shooting that we saw of AKA. Can you just share your thoughts about it? Because I don't know if you have seen the CCTV footage. It is clearly a brazen murder and so up close and personal. It's really a heinous crime.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would like to send condolences to AKA's family and to his colleagues. Yeah, I think that we are seeing more and more of this kind of crime happening. I think that the murder rate in the country has increased significantly. And I think that in KwaZulu-Natal particularly, it's the province that's worst affected by activities of hit squads, and the involvement of hit squads in the province, etc. It's one of the worst affected provinces with regard to that. I think it's a province where there is also a significant number of illicit firearms available to criminals that want to be involved in violent crimes.
I mean, I just recall years ago an interview with Mary De Haas, who's a security expert, and she was speaking particularly about KwaZulu-Natal and the spate of murders there, speaking about how there are arms caches hidden from the apartheid era, as you mentioned, about illicit firearms. Is this the only reason? Because, you know, we often hear about guns for hire and how easy they are, how inexpensive they are in KwaZulu-Natal.
Yeah, and I think that KwaZulu-Natal mirrors what is happening in the rest of the country. I think that the availability of illicit arms in the country generally, and obviously in a province like KwaZulu-Natal, is extensive. I think that historically a lot of those weapons would have come from arms caches from the conflict in KwaZulu-Natal, as well as weapons smuggled across the border from conflicts in those countries. But what we're seeing more and more is that the vast majority of firearms currently flowing into the illicit firearm market are coming from newer, more domestic sources. And those sources would include firearms lost and stolen from civilians, firearms that were under the protection of the police, so that would include both police-issue firearms and firearms handed in to the police as evidence or during amnesties, as well as firearms from other government departments that have gone missing, and private security companies. And these firearms are, to a large extent, the firearms that are currently fueling the illicit firearm pools. Yes, we are seeing a few firearms still being smuggled into the country, but the vast majority are newer firearms coming from our own domestic sources.
Just, if you could just share with us the trends that we've seen, particularly, I mean, post-democracy, that is an important distinction for a reason. I want to understand how the SAPS, the security forces, have dealt with this, because the lack of transformation has also been pointed to about why the SAPS and the inefficacy is a problem. Are you able to share with us what you've noticed over the years?
Well, I think what we have noticed over the years is that organized crime in this country is becoming increasingly more rampant, and we are hitting a tipping point. And what I think we are really lacking in this country is is a very serious, comprehensive strategy to deal with organized crime. And here in the arena of organized crime, we're talking about a whole lot of different markets, including markets that thrive on violence, such as your armed robberies, your targeted assassinations, etc., as well as your illicit firearm pools, etc.
A 2021 Afrobarometer study said that at the time, 73% of South Africans trusted the police a little or not at all, and only 26% trusted the police somewhat or a lot. And you're saying that what we're seeing, suggests a tipping point. Do you think these figures have increased the number of people who don't trust the police?
I think if you look at some of the information coming out from Stats SA, the government themselves, I think it is showing an increasing decline in people's trust in the police. And that is something that has to be addressed. I think we are seeing a significant number of kind of leadership battles taking place within the police. We've seen a number of senior police officers involved in quite high-level corruption cases. And we're seeing quite a lot of systemic corruption taking place on the ground. If one looks, for example, at firearms as a category, one of our biggest concerns is, yes, there are firearms that are lost and stolen from the civilian population, but our real concern is firearms coming from the state. Firearms and ammunition that are fueling the illicit pool and making it easy for criminals to access firearms that are coming from the state themselves. And in that regard, a number of those coming from the police. I mean, just earlier this year, we heard about 178 firearms going missing from the Norwood police station in Johannesburg out of their evidence stores. A lot of those firearms weren't just handguns, but were semi-automatic firearms. I think that part of the issue is trust in the police, and part of the issue is that the police need to start coming to grips with some of the problems that they are facing with regard to policing in this country.
You mentioned the squabbles within the police service, particularly amongst leaders, and some experts have been saying for a while now that we need leadership changes at the police service, but security agency. But I'm wondering, will that in itself, fix the situation or significantly impact the failures that we're seeing now?
See, I think just changing heads isn't going to solve the problem. I think that there is definitely a need to look at leadership within the police and look at the competency of leadership. But I think also we need to look at our policing strategies and approaches, and particularly when it comes to issues of organized crime. We need to start looking at, are we adopting the most appropriate and effective strategies and making sure that where we do adopt strategies and practices, that those are effectively implemented and that there are consequences for lack of implementation of those strategies and tactics.
What about community policing forums? Is there enough space being created for them to be able to assist the police? Are they more likely to garner better trust within the communities? And funding support for the forums that already do exist, is it enough? And is a mandate for what they ought to be doing clear as well?
I think that there are issues around mandate. So if you look at different areas where community police is operating, you have different approaches to that. And I think there isn't really a holistic approach in terms of how community policing takes place. So in some areas some of the more affluent areas, the community policing is often dominated by private security companies that are performing a particular role. In less more impoverished areas where they can't afford private security, it's up to the communities themselves, and you have things like community patrollers, etc. And I think that all of that does play a role, and it's important to involve the community, but it cannot negate the responsibility of the police, particularly with regard to investigations and responding to incidents of crime and violence.
We thank you so much for your time. Jenni Irish-Qhobosheane, she's the senior analyst at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Much appreciated for sharing your insights with us. Right, we're going to take a quick break. We are back again with more news. You're watching The Globe. Don't go away.